Thank you very much indeed, Aodhán. I feel extremely honored to be here with you in this extremely modern university, which is again very impressive because we are in the 21st century here and not in the Middle Age, obviously, and that is very impressive. So let me thank you. Let me tell you that I'm very, very happy to be here, very happy to be given very generously, if I understand, 15 minutes for my introductory remarks. And then, of course, we could have, I understand, a question and answer session. So let me mention a number of things that I think are quite important in this very, very short span of time. One is, and Ireland knows that better than anybody, that we had discovered at the moment of the crisis, the financial crisis, which started in 2007 and 2008, not in Europe, as you know, but in the United States of America, but we discovered that we had weaknesses in Europe. We resisted to the financial crisis at the moment of Lehman Brothers, but we had problems of our own, and a number of countries were in great difficulty. So why were we in this difficulty? I would only mention 5 points, which seems to me very important in terms of explaining why a number of countries had major difficulties in Europe. First, we did not respect the Stability and Growth Pact, and that was really something which was difficult to forgive because I say that it was not the main problem of Ireland, as everybody knows. The Stability and Growth Pact was not a problem for Ireland. It was very well respected. But for a number of other countries, particularly for Portugal or for Greece, obviously, this was a real issue, not respecting the Stability and Growth Pact. The second point was that there was no real monitoring of the cost competitiveness of the various countries member of the euro area. That had been discussed at the moment of the negotiation of the treaty, was considered not necessarily appropriate because market economies, after all, are supposed to adjust themselves. And in case you have a loss of competitiveness, it was expected from the economy itself, from the social partners, that they would correct the anomalies associated with loss of cost competitiveness. But the fact is that there was no such, I would say, spontaneous correction. And we could see, and I could see in particular with my colleagues in the ECB, that year after year after year, we had an augmentation of the unit labor cost, an augmentation of the loss of cost competitiveness that was not corrected. So it was, some kind of sustained divergences which drove a number of countries to have imbalances, and particularly, I would say, external imbalances of great magnitude. And of course, all this was, I would say, self-reinforced by a number of bubbles that were facilitated during that period by the absence of appropriate correction. And of course, we had a number of countries in this situation, and Spain is certainly a case in point. So that was the second reason why it seems to me we had this problem. A third reason was that we had no banking union, and it appeared in the crisis that the virtuous loop, the virtuous circle of a country's remaining very credible as far as its own signature was concerned, and banks which were backed by this state signature being themselves credible because of the backing of the state. And on the contrary, when you had the virtuous loop in some countries, we had the vicious circle in other countries where you had a country losing its authority and its creditworthiness, and the banks losing themselves their creditworthiness. And so the banking union is something which we were badly in need, of course, at the moment of the crisis. And not surprisingly, now we have decisions that are coping with this issue. Now we had a fourth problem, in my opinion, which was the absence of ex-ante instrument to combat, I would say, a financial crisis of this kind, and to be credible, in fact, of the speculative part of the market. And that was something which was equally very, very clearly weakening the euro area at the time. We had no stability mechanism, European stability mechanism. The ESM had to be created on the spot during the period of great difficulty. So you see, I see four reasons: not absence of respect of the Stability and Growth Pact, plus three other reasons that might explain why we were in this difficult situation. Now, there is a last reason, and I take it that in Ireland everybody would agree with me, which is that we had not done what we had said we should do in terms of completion of the single market, on the one hand, and completion, full achievement, if I may, of the structural reforms. The paradox there was that the euro area has a need of having as flexible as possible an economy, a single economy with a single currency. The euro area has a particular need for structural reforms and a particular need for achieving the single market. And as you know, there has been a lot of resistance, not in this country, obviously, but in a number of countries. And the fact that these great endeavors were not achieved or half achieved has played a role, because again, it had complicated the spontaneous adjustment of market economies that was necessary in the circumstances. That's for the causes that I wanted to mention again as an introductory exposition. What did we do with that? As you know, in terms of governance of the euro area, of the EMU, we have now reinforced the Stability and Growth Pact, which is, in my opinion, extremely important. I am not very, very happy with the, I would say, laxism which I see in the air as regards fiscal discipline, because we know better than anybody that absence of fiscal discipline was paid with a very, very high price. So I feel from time to time, from that standpoint, that we are a little bit going back, if I may, to the years before 2007. So that's one. But again, in the crisis, we reinforced the Stability and Growth Pact. We have the Fiscal Compact. We have a number of points. We have reversed the burden of the proof as regards the implementation of the rules of the Stability and Growth Pact. So we are in a universe which has been reinforced. The second point, the absence of monitoring of cost competitiveness. We have there to introduce a new pillar for the governance, the economic governance of the euro area, which is the macroeconomic imbalance procedure. And if I have a message for you, it would be the MIP, the macroeconomic imbalance procedure, is as important as the SGP. I consider this second pillar very, very important. Fact is that I don't see in the air a lot of references to the MIP. I mentioned that en passant. But again, it's abnormal. We should be fully conscious that in a single currency area, the prevention of sustained, persistent divergences of cost competitiveness in whatever direction is something which has to be countered. And this is one of the major roles of the MIP. Now we have the banking union. I don't insist on that. As you know, the banking union is not achieved. We have a lot of hard work to do still, but very important structural reforms has been made, and I take it that it is, again, something which is extremely important in terms of good governance of the euro area in a long-term perspective. Now, I let you judge whether what we have in terms of ESM, European Stability Mechanism, suffices. It is undoubtedly something which is important. There is a new treaty there. There is money there, which in case we have to cope with new difficulty, is something which is credible, obviously. Whether it should be larger is another story, But we have, as you see, contrary to what is very often said, the Europeans had an enormous problem. They did nothing. I see with you, and listing these measures that have been taken, that it's not true. The Europeans didn't do nothing. They did a number of things which have to be applied, of course, very seriously as possible. Now, is it sufficient? Can we consider that if we have full implementation of the measures that have been taken under the heat of the crisis, can we consider that it suffices? I would certainly say no. Of course, it's a precondition. If we want to be sure that we have stability, prosperity, job creation, and fight against unemployment in all the euro area, we have to apply. And we have to apply by the rules, because when you have a single currency, it goes without saying that there is a quid pro quo for that. And the quid pro quo is to go by the rule. And by the way, I mentioned en passant, those who went by the rule are in a very good situation, obviously. So we see very clearly that it is not the euro area which is creating problem, because under exactly the same condition, you have economies that are at full employment. But it seems to me that we must go further, and I mentioned that only to open up to question, of course, because I have no time to elaborate much more on that. But let me mention that it seems to me that we have to reinforce both the executive branch of EMU and the legislative branch of EMU. Legislative branch because presently, as you know, all those pillars of governance are under the responsibility of the Commission on the one hand and of the Council on the other hand. The President of the Eurogroup has an extremely important role to play. I take it that it would be better if the presidency of the Eurogroup possibly merge with the specialized commissioner would be a single person, a single individual, man or woman, having that responsibility, and not, as is the case now, as you know, a person who has the responsibility of being Minister of Finance in his own country and President of the Minister of Finance of the Euro area. And as regards the Commissioner, there is a Commissioner who is responsible both, if I may, for EU and for the Euro area. So in both cases, it seems to me that we really need, because a single currency area, which is a single market with a single currency area, needs governance, and needs governance on the basis of the superior interest of the area as a whole, and again, not on the basis of a compromise between various considerations. I said also that we should reinforce the overall legislative branch. I take it that one of the problems of EMU, Europe as a whole, but EMU is certainly the democratic legitimacy. Of course, all institutions in Europe are legitimate democratically. I would say ministers are ministers in a legitimate democratic government by definition. The Council is democratic by construction. The Parliament is democratic because the MPs have been elected by universal suffrage. And the Commission itself, as you know, now is responsible and has to be given its own authority by the Parliament. So you see, all the institutions I have mentioned are democratic, but still there is no direct, I would say, sentiment by the people of Europe, in my opinion, that the system is really democratic when there is a conflict between one particular country and the institutions. When you have such a conflict, and in the past we could see, for instance, the difficulty of Greece during a long period of time with a succession of European Council and I would say a succession of happening in a way. There was no way of, I would say, concluding the problem other than reaching progressively a consensus of heads. If we had a procedure permitting the country which is challenging the European institutions' recommendation to go before MPs. So you judge MPs, the European Parliament in the format of the euro area, or a combination of the European Parliament format euro area and national parliaments. That depends on the vision one has of the state of, I would say, democratic accountability where we are in Europe, whether we need only the democratic accountability at the level of the European institutions or whether we need both. But in that case, I would say the last word should be given to the representative of the people. And to the extent that we have a problem between one particular country and the other countries, member of the euro area, it seems to me that it would be normal, again, that we would say it is to all of us to decide, because after all, we are all depending on the stability of the euro area as a whole, and we could all see that in the circumstances. So it's not something which is abstract or a theory. It is in practice that we could see that all the euro area was put in great difficulty when 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countries out of 15 at the time and now out of 19 today had difficulty. So it seems to me that these are two directions in which we could work. It's not easy. It calls, of course, for a new treaty. And of course, one should not be naive. It is certainly difficult to proceed, to go in this direction, but it seems to me that, to sum up again, to go forward both in the direction of a more solid executive branch and a more solid democratic accountability would be something which makes sense. Makes sense at the level of history, because let's not forget that what we are doing is a historical process that started 67 years ago with the steel and coal community, and then goes and goes and goes, and proved great resilience. And I will conclude on that. I'm under your strict control, sir. I would like to, we are all under a dominant narrative, and you know that better than anybody because we are in an English-speaking country here. Not on English, of course. I am a Breton, a French Briton myself, so I even if I don't speak, unfortunately, the Celtic language. But we are under a narrative which is more or less giving credit to the idea that we had a fantastic endeavor. It was very bold, indeed. Very bold. European Union, very bold. Euro area, very bold, but very fragile, and certainly not persistent in the long run. And when I am, a little bit everywhere in the world, I'm asked questions which seems to me bizarre. For instance, how many years do you think the euro will stay? Or how many countries will leave the euro area? Or do you think that the euro area can persist? No, it's not. It's impossible. So I know that you are exactly under the same environment. And so let me give you in conclusion, some of the arguments that I give to my interlocutors and which from time to time are surprising them a little bit. First, I tell them, do you know that the euro hold in the worst crisis ever since World War II, which we all trust, I would say most at least of the economists trust, that it could have been the worst crisis since World War I, namely potentially it could have been as destabilizing as in the crisis of 29-30, had not central banks taken enormous and very bold measures, and governments taken extremely bold and courageous measures. So again, we hold, and much of the time the criticism on the euro was the euro is too strong. So the stress test was there. We had the worst crisis ever, and instead of looking at the euro collapsing, you could see at the euro vis-à-vis the US dollar, vis-à-vis the other currency being called to be a little less strong. So I mentioned that en passant as something which is not in line with the narrative I was mentioning. Second point, I told them, look, we were 15 countries in the euro area at the moment of the collapse of Lehman Brothers. 15. I will help you, I'm telling my interlocutors, the 15 are still there. Greece is there, Greece didn't leave. Could you tell me how many we are today? And I make the test. Those who know how we are today, raise hands. So here I dare not ask that because you all know, of course. But in London, in New York, and in Asia, most of the time, because of what they read and hear, they don't know that we are 19 and that 4 new countries got in the euro area after Lehman Brothers. So in the heat of the crisis. And so I'm telling them, look, if it were true that we would be as vulnerable as you say, and I accept fully, of course, that a number of countries had difficulties in the circumstances, but how can it be that we were 15 at the beginning of the crisis and 19 today? And that of course, is an argument which has some strength, if I may. Now, a last one, which is not the least. Not the least, and again, it's never communicated. You will never see that we are 19 and we were 15. It's not. It doesn't fit with the doxa. You know, the doxa is totally different. Now, let me mention a fact which is new, which has not been communicated at all, but you can check in the internet. The last survey, the last opinion survey we had in Europe was the last Eurobarometer. It was a survey made in November, if I'm not misled, published in December. So very, very close to the present day. And as regards the backing of the euro for the people of Europe, of the euro area, they are asking the same question since the very beginning, which is something like, are you in agreement or in disagreement with the following sentence? A single monetary union with a single currency, the euro. And the last opinion survey, totally contrary to what all we hear and can read, was that we had 70% of positive response, backing that sentence, which is the equivalent of as high as the highest level that we had before the crisis. When I was myself president in 2004, 2007 and 2008, before Lehman Brothers, we had 70%. So we are back, if I may, to that level. And I draw your attention to that because it is something which, again, is not communicated. So one has the feeling, yes, perhaps he's right when he says that the euro hold, perhaps he's right when he says that the euro area hold, or even expanded during the crisis, but he cannot be right in suggesting that the backing is as high as it was before the crisis. It is there. You can check. I recommend you to check. And an additional element which is interesting, but I will really conclude on that because I am sure that you have a lot of questions, is the following. The Germans are supposed to look for going back to the DM. And that is not discussed. When you are in any environment out of the euro area, it goes without saying. And the Greeks are very keen on leaving. That also is a given because all the difficulty they had to recover and to adjust in difficult circumstances. Now, the figures I have for this backing of the euro is 81% in Germany, not 70, 81%, and 68% in Greece, not 70, 68. So you see, we are in the middle of a process which I hope will continue to be able to deliver not only. I am in a university here. I would perhaps borrow the concept of Spinoza. Persevere in the being. We proved a capacity to persevere in the being, which was not I would say, seen as likely at all by the rest of the world. But it doesn't suffice to persevere in the being. You have to deliver, and you have to deliver growth and jobs. And that's the reason why I don't draw from all what I said that we should be tranquille and that we can be satisfied with what has happened and what we observe today. I take it that we have a very hard work to do, not the least in applying all the new governance pillars that I mentioned, and also in completing the single market and in achieving the structural reforms that are overdue in all the countries in Europe and the euro area that have still unemployment much too high. And there are, very unfortunately, a number of countries in this situation. So this is what I wanted to tell you. I hope that I did not take too much of your time, and I stand ready to respond to questions.